You're at the kitchen sink, coffee in hand, on the phone with your daughter. She's telling you about her week. You're listening, or you think you are. And then your own train of thought simply stops. Not distraction, not fatigue. The thread you were holding just goes blank. You say, and hope she didn't notice. But you noticed. And this isn't the first time this week. There's something specific about this kind of blank, heavier than ordinary forgetfulness, a quality that makes you catch yourself wondering, what if this is how it starts? Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. The research increasingly suggests this may have nothing to do with aging at all. It may be about something in your environment that has been systematically interfering with the neurochemical system your brain depends on for sharp, reliable recall. And if that's true, and the data points strongly in that direction, then no number of crossword puzzles was ever going to fix it. I'm Dr. Chloe Arrington, biochemist, and on this channel we go into what the data actually shows. Today I want to address something that has been accumulating in the research for years and remains largely absent from the mainstream clinical conversation: chronic environmental neurotoxin exposure as a driver of the cognitive slippage that millions of people over 50 are told is simply normal aging. Here is the institutional failure I want to name directly. When someone over 50 comes in reporting memory difficulties, losing conversational threads, blanking mid-sentence, brain fog that won't lift, the standard clinical response is neurological screening, checking for disease markers. What almost never happens is a serious investigation into the patient's chronic neurotoxic burden. Yet a 2024 review published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease showed that targeted compounds, specifically antioxidants and autophagy activators, can measurably reduce the damage that reactive oxygen species inflict on neural tissue, and were associated with sustained improvements in cognition and emotional performance in patients with early cognitive impairment. Your brain has been fighting something real. The mainstream told you to do more word puzzles. This channel exists to translate what the research actually says, past the comfortable oversimplifications, so the decisions you make about your brain are grounded in something real. That's the only thing this channel is for. If that matters to you, hit subscribe. And right now, if what's been happening to your thinking feels less like ordinary forgetfulness and more like something is actively in the way, type the word clear in the comments. I want to know how many of you recognize that description, because it's more specific than most people realize. Let me walk you through the actual biological sequence, from environmental toxin exposure to the specific moment your recall fails. Think of your brain's neural network like a city's water distribution system. Memory flows from storage to retrieval, the way water flows from reservoir to tap, through interconnected pathways that, when clean, deliver the signal quickly and clearly. Environmental neurotoxins are like heavy mineral deposits building up inside the pipes over years, invisible, accumulating slowly, narrowing the flow. By the time you notice the drop in pressure at the tap, the buildup has been happening for a long time. Crossword puzzles, in this analogy, are the equivalent of turning on more faucets to fix low water pressure. You're adding activity. You are not cleaning the pipes. Here is the specific sequence your brain is running. Chronic exposure to heavy metals, air pollution particulates, and pesticide residues triggers sustained oxidative stress in neural tissue, a persistent flood of reactive oxygen species that degrades the cellular machinery your brain uses to maintain itself. The first casualty is nerve growth factor production. NGF is the protein responsible for building and repairing the neural connections your memories travel through. When the cellular environment becomes hostile enough, NGF synthesis drops and retrieval pathways begin to structurally degrade. The second consequence, the brain's neurochemical clearance system fails. Tau protein fragments and beta amyloid peptides, which the brain is supposed to remove through its overnight autophagy process, begin accumulating in the synaptic spaces your memory signals must pass through. A 2023 study published in Molecules identified a specific compound from tamarind pulp that measurably reduced both tau protein and beta amyloid levels, lowered the enzyme responsible for degrading acetylcholine, the brain's primary memory neurotransmitter, and increased antioxidant enzyme activity. Recall function in the tested models improved. The memories are still there. The pipes need to be cleared. The reason most people aren't improving is that the solutions they've tried were built for a completely different problem. Crossword puzzles and word games. These exercise language and pattern recognition circuits. They do not reduce oxidative stress. They do not restore NGF production. They do not clear tau or beta amyloid from the retrieval pathways your recall depends on. You can become an expert solver and still experience progressive cognitive interference because you were training the wrong system entirely. Brain training apps, same structural failure. Task-specific improvement. Zero transfer to the underlying neurochemical damage that's blocking retrieval. Generic antioxidant supplements, or brain vitamins. If you've tried these and felt nothing, here is the precise reason. The oxidative damage driving your symptoms is happening inside your neurons, not your bloodstream. A compound that can't cross the blood-brain barrier and reach neural tissue in meaningful concentrations isn't touching the actual problem, regardless of what the label claims. Neural bioavailability isn't a bonus feature, it's the requirement. You weren't failing to fix this. You had the wrong tools for the actual target. Here's what it looks like when an intervention actually reaches the source of the problem, not the symptom. Day 1. Nothing you would notice on the surface. Biochemically, the body's antioxidant defense systems begin responding. The sustained oxidative load that's been battering your neural environment starts slowly to decrease. NGF synthesis receives its first signal that the cellular environment is becoming less hostile. You won't feel this. The groundwork is being laid. One critical note before we continue. This only applies if the formulation you're using actually reaches neural tissue. A compound that stays in the bloodstream cannot clear the pipes. Delivery format determines whether any of what follows actually occurs. And this is where most supplements quietly fail. Day 3. You're on the phone with your son. He's explaining a situation at work. Multiple people involved, multiple threads, a timeline you'd normally struggle to hold all at once. In the past, you'd have been quietly treading water, catching fragments, composing plausible responses, hoping he didn't notice you'd lost the thread 10 seconds ago. This time, the thread holds. A name he mentions connects immediately to the story you remember from last month, to the context you already carry. You're tracking everything cleanly, without effort. When the call ends, you sit for a moment. What you notice isn't that it went well. It's that you weren't bracing for it to go wrong. That specific preparatory tension, the quiet armor you've been putting on before every conversation for months, it wasn't there. The fear simply didn't arrive. Day 2. What was happening underneath? While you were finding your way to day 3, day 2 was doing invisible work. Autophagy, your brain's own cellular cleanup, had begun removing tau protein fragments from the synaptic spaces most critical to memory transmission. Reactive oxygen species levels were declining as antioxidant enzyme activity increased. NGF synthesis was beginning to restore the structural integrity of neural connections that had been degrading under chronic oxidative load. The mineral deposits were dissolving from the inside. That is what made day 3 possible. Day 5. You're at a neighbor's cookout, multiple conversations moving fast around you. You're tracking names, context, the callback to something someone said 20 minutes earlier. At some point, a friend says something like, "You've been so on today." And you realize you weren't monitoring yourself. You weren't managing your exposure. You were just there, inside the conversations, not hovering above them, calculating the risk. The fear of being perceived as diminished, the one that has quietly reshaped your social behavior over the past year, begins to release its grip. Day 7. You're at dinner with your husband. You're telling him a story, a real one, names, details, a proper timeline. You don't lose it mid-sentence. You don't trail off and redirect. You tell the whole thing, clean through to the end. And somewhere in the moment after, you realize you never once thought about whether you'd be able to. You were just present in it. That's who you are. You got yourself back. For an intervention to genuinely address neurochemically driven cognitive decline from environmental toxin exposure, it has to meet 4 specific criteria. Most things marketed as brain supplements don't meet all 4, and the gap is not subtle. 1. It must actively stimulate nerve growth factor synthesis, not passively supply nutrients that vaguely support brain health. NGF production is suppressed by chronic oxidative stress. A real solution has to restore the biological signal that triggers NGF production directly from the inside. 2. It must contain compounds with demonstrated reactive oxygen species scavenging activity at the neural level, not general dietary antioxidants that circulate in the bloodstream and never reach the tissue where the actual damage is occurring. 3. It must measurably support the clearance of tau protein and beta amyloid accumulation, the specific molecular debris building up in retrieval pathways as the brain's overnight cleaning function breaks down. Without this criterion, you are cleaning the outside of the pipes while the interior stays blocked. 4. It must actually cross the blood-brain barrier and operate inside neural tissue. This is the criterion that eliminates most oral supplements. Neural bioavailability has to be engineered specifically. It is not a default outcome of standard formulation. The delivery format is not a minor detail. It determines whether anything gets to the problem at all. Most products fail on criteria 3 or 4. I was looking for something that addressed all 4 simultaneously. That product is NeuroPrime. It's the formulation I found that actually maps onto all 4 of those criteria, and the delivery format is a specific part of why it addresses the bioavailability problem that disqualifies most alternatives. That portion of the explanation is more technical than I can do justice to in 30 seconds here. There's a link in the description. What you'll find there is the full scientific breakdown of how environmental neurotoxin exposure creates this specific pattern of neurochemical failure, and what was found when researchers set out to address all 4 of those failure points in a single targeted formulation. Read through it. The mechanism explanation alone will reframe a lot of what you've been experiencing. Honest expectations, because I think overselling timelines is exactly why people give up on real interventions too early. You may notice a distinct improvement in mental clarity within the first 7 days. Not dramatic, but measurable. A reduction in the cognitive friction sitting between you and your own memories. Full, sustained results typically develop over 30 to 60 days of consistent use as the neurochemical environment progressively clears. The protocol is 1 drop each morning, under the tongue or mixed into your coffee, your tea, whatever your routine already is. 10 seconds. There is no complex regimen. And there is a full 365-day money-back guarantee. If it doesn't deliver for you, you receive a complete refund. The risk of the wrong decision has been entirely removed. If today changed the way you understand what's been happening to your thinking, type the word sharp in the comments, because that is what you are. Something got into the system. That is not the same thing as your brain failing you. And if you know someone in your life who has been quietly withdrawing from conversations, from gatherings, from any situation where they'd have to rely on their recall, share this with them. Being directed to crossword puzzles when there is active neurochemical interference is not just unhelpful. It burns time that matters and leaves the real cause untouched. Your brain didn't give up on you. Something got into the system, and now you know what to do about it.